Hi, everyone. So I'm Jesse. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm a second year full-time student at Anderson. And over the last 2 quarters, I've had the privilege of serving as our student government's VP of EDI and working with the EDI committee to bring together EDW and all of these awesome sessions throughout this week. So there's been many, many emails, many conversations, and many days anticipating this day. And I'm so happy to finally be here with all of you. So on behalf of the Anderson EDI committee, ASA, and two of the key creators behind the curtain of this event, Rebecca Fong and Suesh Acharya. Sorry, I tried my best. I'm pointing to my sides because at least on my screen, you're both on my side. So I'm just going to stretch over and say hi. High five. Awesome. On behalf of all of us here, welcome. Welcome to this session today. Welcome to EDW. Welcome to IFA. We are looking forward to getting started. And one quick logistical comment before I pass it over to our moderator. Please follow UCLA Anderson on LinkedIn and Instagram, and particularly on Instagram if you'd like to enter our raffle, because we have some dope swag that we're actually raffling off at the end this week. So without further ado, I'll pass over the mic to my friend and student leader, Darren Douglas. Go for it.
Thank you, Jesse. Excited to be here. And thank you, Joyce and Wesley, for joining us. We're excited to have such esteemed industry leaders in our presence. My name again is Darren Douglas. I am a second year as well, originally from New York and now working in venture capital for Plexo Capital. But I would love to first start off with some introductions. We can start with you, Wesley, to get the ball rolling.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, rest of the team, Rebecca, Suyesh, everyone for having me here. As has been mentioned, my name is Wesley Adjei. I go by Wes. Was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. So if there's anyone from Africa out there, shout outs. But spent 10 years in New York prior to business school, college, and then a few different roles, all within finance. So equity research, a bit of wealth management, private banking, and then corporate banking, and then came to Anderson. Went to do M&A at Bank of America for a bit, and then now I'm a vice president in a specialized industries group at JPMorgan Chase. So happy to talk more about my background and all that kind of stuff like as we go along.
Thank you, Wesley, and on to you, Joyce.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'll go pretty quickly. I started my career in management consulting for a couple of years, and then went to Google for 3 or so years after that. Went to Anderson, graduated in 2018. It was a full-time MBA, and focused primarily on finance. So I had a few stints in investment banking at Barclays, venture capital, and right after business school, I worked for a place called Turner Impact Capital based in Santa Monica. So it's a real estate private equity firm focused on kind of social infrastructure. So I did that for about 3 years. And I recently joined a startup doing capital markets and startups in the fintech space.
That's awesome. Thank you both for sharing. Just to give you all an idea of the agenda for today, we'll start off with some planned questions, but we'd really love for this to be conversational. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll also have time for Q&A after our prepared questions. To get us started and to jog your memory before we get back to your time at Anderson, can you speak to what made you decide to tackle your current role? Maybe any influencers that influenced you to take that leap?
I can go first. I have a really great story that was a really compelling reason for me to join. So I was pretty happy at Turner. Wasn't really looking actively to leave. But I found my company. It's called Landed. As I mentioned, it's a fintech startup, and at a high level, what we do is we help essential professionals buy homes. So we'll co-invest in the down payments of folks. So essential professionals are, in our case, educators, healthcare professionals, and government employees. So these are folks with very stable employment that can afford mortgage payments, but maybe don't have enough for a down payment, which is typically because they don't have rich parents. So we're kind of addressing a really specific group of people. So I was interested in the impact story, kind of increasing accessibility to home ownership. So that was kind of why I thought Landed was interesting. But what got me through the door was my first conversation with my now boss, who she was super charismatic and great. But I think the thing that stuck out to me was that she championed me from day one. The conversation ended with, a compensation question, which is always really uncomfortable. And I still don't know how to answer, like, what do you think in terms of comp? I still have no idea how to answer that. But I just told her the truth. She's like, I told her what I made currently at Turner. And she's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to ask for that plus 20K more. And that was super like unexpected, especially at a startup. I was fairly certain I was going to take a pay cut. But what stood out was not just the money, which was nice, but more importantly, someone that was really advocating for me. And that had never happened in my career, even at places I currently worked at. Even at Turner, my own boss didn't really advocate for my comp. So that I took that leap of faith, and she's been a champion ever since. So for women, people of color, et cetera, having a sponsor or a mentor, that is so, so important. So she's been that for me for the last few months.
I'll sort of pick off from where Joyce left off and talk about like the importance of mentors. So I, made my decision to get into my new role based on, well, one, I wanted some personal lifestyle changes. That was a big thing, moving from investment banking. The second was like, I recognized quickly what I was great at in investment banking, and I wanted to do more of that, what I was good at and what I enjoyed. And my current role, which is like it's finance focused, but also a lot of, business development, allowed me to do that. And so I was like, well, here's a role that will be good on comp, will let me do more of what I like. And, going back to mentors, I spoke to a few mentors of mine and was like wrestling with the decision, hey, should I leave investment banking? Should I leave yet? And they were like, knowing you'll be great at this. And so go for it. And that was sort of like a good sounding board for me to make that jump. So speaking of influencers, I'll say my mentors were definitely there to help.
That's awesome to hear. You both sort of spoke to the importance of people and a sort of a culture of empowerment. Can you talk about how much of a factor culture was in looking for a role now, and how that's maybe changed throughout your career?
I can start. I think culture is like super important. So in fact, like when I was leaving business school, from looking for an internship and then for a full-time role, that was a very big thing for me. I was, looking for a place where, these days you spend a lot of your time at work, right? So you want a place where you can be yourself, you can be your authentic self, you can grow, and you can learn from people. I found that, sort of at Anderson, first of all, and at the company that I went on to work for at B of A, there was a very strong Anderson contingent at the bank and in my group. And so it felt like home. And so that's been something that's been very important. And it's like super helpful to be in a culture where you feel supported, where you feel like you have the ear of certain senior people and you can be yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for me, in my earlier days of my career, culture felt less important. I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I'm still figuring that out. But after business school, I think I felt a bit of pressure to find a prestigious job or a job that paid a lot. And I think that's a perfectly fine thing to go for. If you want to live a certain lifestyle, or if you have family to support, like, I think it's important to consider money. And I have nothing against that, especially for people of color. If you have family support, like, it's okay to go to want a certain amount of money. So that's my first point. But in terms of culture, culture is the reason why I didn't go back into the banking, investment banking firm I interned at. Because as Wes said, you spend most of your waking hours at work, especially in finance. You're probably putting in a few more hours than the average person. And it's everything. So, because at the end of the day in finance, depending on your exact role, you're spending a lot of time in PowerPoint and spreadsheets, which is true basically anywhere. I still spend a lot of time doing that. But the people make such a huge, huge difference. And the other thing I'll kind of volunteer is, I think culture is a very like nebulous concept. Everyone talks about how important it is, but like, what is it and what does it mean to you? And how do you figure out what that means. Because in banking, they're always like, is this person a good cultural fit? And the question's like, do you want to spend 20 hours with this person a day? Or like, would you want to be stuck in an elevator with this person? But I always struggled with kind of how to figure out what that meant for me as the person that's interviewing. So some questions that you can ask: if work-life balance is important to you, like don't ask like, what's your work-life balance or how many hours a week do you work? But ask like, what do you do after work? If they don't do anything, I think it's an indicator that they don't have much time to do things after work. So there are ways to kind of get at this question of culture. Like, what do you do after work? What are some, do you guys have mentorship programs? How are decisions made? Is it made top down or bottom up? So those are all kinds of questions you can get at to help address this culture question, but it is super important. And I'd be happy to kind of brainstorm with folks on how to get to that answer for yourself. And obviously very personal, but spend a lot of time at work. So nothing's more important than culture.
And, one quick thing I'll add, Darren, is like, it's important to look at the company that you're going into and see if you're represented there, right? So one of the big things for me here at JPMorgan is seeing like the commitment of the firm to diversity, seeing their commitment to having like, Black leadership. And so in my group, I'm seeing, Black MDs and like a newly installed Black CFO of the whole, group. And so that's important. Like that makes me know, okay, well, that's a firm that is actually committed. They put their money where their mouth is, and seeing that is also powerful, right? So, if I'm seeing someone who's an MD and that's my ultimate goal, I know, okay, this can be done. And this is someone I can talk to about, how they, navigated their way there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the other thing I learned about diversity is look at diversity at what levels, right? At the junior levels, it's usually fairly diverse. But I always tell folks to see what diverse looks like at the upper levels. My previous firms, lots of junior folks, including myself, who were diverse. And then as you go higher and higher, it looks much less diverse. So to me, true diversity is diversity at every level. I know we're not there yet. We're getting better, but so that's something to kind of look out for as you kind of stock people on like the team page of the company's website.
Awesome. Thank you both for those insightful answers. We did have a question come in from the chat that I'd like to highlight. Are there any specific kinds of initiatives that you would like to see finance firms undertake to increase representation of underrepresented groups in the industry?
I can talk specifically for not investment banks. I think investment banks tend to be larger and kind of have more formal programming in place. My experience in finance has been with smaller companies, and I was at a place that didn't have HR. So I think that's a great starting point, is to have HR. But some of these smaller shops, PE and real estate, don't have HR. And I think historically, some of these places look at HR as purely an administrative function, like who's going to roll out benefits and like payroll and all that. I would really, maybe it's a red flag. I mean, decide for yourself as you kind of recruit for these types of firms, but that should be a minimum. Having HR, having an outlet, someone to speak with about concerns. Maybe someone said something that was really insensitive or ignorant, and I didn't have that outlet. So I felt that was very frustrating. And even better than that would it be have someone focus on DEI. DEI shouldn't be the responsibility of individual employees. I think at smaller places, sometimes it does kind of end up that way. But having someone focus on that takes a huge burden off of you as a diverse person. The job's hard enough. Last thing you need is to do your job and wonder about diversity, like recruiting and retention and all that.
I think what I'd add is I think lately investment banks in particular are doing a good job, or I should say an okay job at attracting people in the door. It's the keeping them that's tends to be difficult. So there's so many programs that like throw money even at you, like to join a firm or intern somewhere, and they give sort of tuition reimbursements and things like that. So it's a good way to get people in the door. But you find that once you're in, there's not that sustained, effort to check in and see how you're doing, how you're faring. And we kind of talked about this because there are usually not a lot of people at the top that look like you that you can relate and talk to. It can be challenging to figure out, well, I'm having these issues. Who can I talk to? Who can I relate with about these peculiar issues that I'm facing as a a person from a diverse background. So I think perhaps they can do more with establishing mentorship programs within these firms that are specifically towards people of color and people from diverse backgrounds.
Thank you both. Another question relatedly is not just on the recruiting front to get in the door, like you said, but in terms of advancement, how do you think your experience differs from that of your peers who might not be underrepresented? It's a loaded question, I know.
I think I can start. It's tough, right? But again, like I said, right currently at my firm, I'm seeing increasingly Black leaders. And so I'm able to be a little bit of a master of my destiny in terms of intentionally seeking out these leaders and making sure I'm talking to them regularly and having them be a champion for me when I need it. Because so currently, for me personally, to get to my next level, I'll need the support, actual support, MDs, I need about 5 managing directors to actually write, from different parts of the bank to write and say, hey, that guy Wes deserves to be promoted to executive director, right? So the onus is on me. And so, again, it's challenging when you don't have enough support, right? And you typically tend to get support from people you can, you've worked with or you can relate with, well. And that tends to be people who have a similar background as you. So I think my experience is different from others in that way because, yes, I'm seeing, some Black leadership, but it's still, the minority compared to the majority.
Yeah, I agree. I have so many thoughts on this, but I think the way I kind of separate in my head is there's the external factors, and then there's like Wes said, the factors that you can control. The external factors is, yes, at the top, there are not a lot of diverse folks. And that's, seeing is believing sometimes. So it's hard to really envision yourself as an MD if there's no one that looks like you that's at the top. That being said, that shouldn't instill a sense of hopelessness. I think it's, you can be the first, or, the other thing, it is getting more diverse. And more importantly, something that I often forget is your mentors and your influencers, they can be white men too. That sounds obvious. But, diversity is so important and at the forefront in finance and kind of all industries that I think that is becoming more and more possible and likely. So that's a reminder to myself, probably more than anything, that your mentors can look not the same as you, because necessarily many of them aren't going to. So I'll say that. So there's the external factors, which is, as Wes said, it's just hard to relate to someone who's very culturally different from you or, much older, et cetera. So there's those things that make it a little uncomfortable. I think for my thoughts on as a woman specifically, one thing that I have found for myself is this inability to kind of put myself forward. So I tend to, women and perhaps me or maybe other women tend to kind of strive for perfection. And when we read a job description, you're like, do we fit every single one of the criteria? And then if not, then we won't apply. So it's kind of this self-inflicted barrier where we think, oh, we have to be perfect in order to be qualified. And that's just not true. There's plenty of studies about that kind of topic, about how men tend to apply for jobs that they're not fully qualified for, and women just sometimes don't even apply. And And another example from a friend of mine, she also went to Anderson and is a VP at UBS in New York. Kind of a funny example. Her first performance review, part of it was to self review. So out of a scale of five being the highest, how would you kind of rate your performance? And she's like, I'm not average. I think I'm above average, but I'm probably not that great. So she gave herself a 4, which to me felt really reasonable. Then she asked all her colleagues, all of whom were men, like, hey, what'd you put for your review? And they all said 5. And obviously that's not statistically possible. And then what ended up happening is she got her review, and her manager really championed her and said, like, no, you deserve a 5. You'll get compensated as 5. So there's 2 factors. One is like unfairly assessing yourself because you're afraid to, toot your own horn relative to other people. And then there's also just having that champion kind of be like, no, you deserve a 5. So kind of a lesson learned. I think it was a great example of just kind of just not really appreciating your own skill sets and not being too afraid to it's not, brag is the wrong word because it's not bragging, but being afraid to, toot your own horn, like I said.
That's a great point. I think it speaks to sort of combating that imposter syndrome that a lot of us have. Another question from the chat that I want to highlight. You both spoke to seeing representation at the senior level and finding internal champions. Do you have any advice on seeking mentorship within a firm from, a senior MD who might be a minority, or just someone who might be a potential mentor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to double click on something Joyce said and then sort of answer your question. Your mentor does not have to always be someone who looks like you. So one of my greatest mentors currently is a white gay man, right? So it's super important to double click that. In terms of like seeking out mentors, so you can start with where you work. And it always doesn't have to be within your firm. Like it could be like, I have a mentor who's in consulting, like who's like a partner at a managing consulting firm. Sometimes you need external sort of feedback as well. So that's a great option. There are, you can also ask within your company, hey, are there mentorship opportunities? And then look for people that way. But the best way is organic. And that comes from striking up a conversation with someone, with people you meet in the office, finding out what they do. And then where there's there's that click that you feel, just making sure you invest in that, right? I think that has been the most successful one for me, which is things that came organically, people that I met organically, and then after that, put in a conscious effort to stay close.
Yeah, I agree. Probably doesn't work to email saying, can you be my mentor? The organic ones are definitely the ones that work the best. That being said, it does require, which is what Wes was alluding to, it does require work. At least for me, it's not natural for me to kind of seek a mentor. That whole concept was pretty foreign to me earlier in my career, but it is incredibly important. So I kind of have those, kind of relate on a personal level, don't have to just talk about work, but kind of continue the conversation, follow up with them. And because it's not, the onus is on you to kind of continue the conversation and not so much on them. So kind of remember that. And one other thing to remember is people really want to help. And I don't think I really realized that earlier in my career. I kind of felt like I was being annoying. And that is just not true. So kind of get that out of your head. People love to help. People love to give advice. So kind of take advantage of that.
Thank you. We have another question that came in. Have you seen concerns or pushback against DE&I initiatives arise from colleagues in the finance industry? And if so, what kinds of concerns have popped up? And what do you think is driving those concerns?
I haven't seen it explicitly. No one was like, DEI is dumb. I mean, you certainly hear about folks who don't like to, they're like, oh, I hate being PC. I haven't heard that personally in my recent roles. I think the way the pushback kind of looks is, for example, refusing to have HR, refusing to have someone who's dedicated to DEI, or my last company, we started having DEI trainings, but there was resistance. They're like, how much does it cost? How much time is it going to take? That's kind of the pushback that I see, as opposed to just this blatant, like, this doesn't make sense. But that pushback is still pushback. It's subtle, but it's kind of silly that we have to create a pitch for why we need DEI training. So that I think folks are kind of understanding that it is important, but they'll try to undermine the efforts in little ways like that, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, similar. Nothing that's explicit, but more subtle. Like, we have to go to this meeting again. It's precious time in my calendar. Nothing explicit, but more so, micro stuff.
Thank you. And jumping back now to your time at Anderson, how do you think the program or the recruiting process has changed since you've been there? And what would you like to see change in the future?
It hasn't been that long.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It hasn't been that long, so I don't think much has changed. Like I was talking to Suyash and Rebecca like a year ago, during recruiting. I think Anderson does this really well. I can speak, for investment banking for sure, that our process works. If you submit yourself to the process, you will be successful. So, yeah.
I would agree. I wish I had a more insightful answer. It hasn't been long enough yet. But the fact that there's a VP of diversity in IFA is new for me. That I think is great to see. So I think in general, across student groups, et cetera, there is more focus on diversity, which is great. But in terms of recruiting, I also recruited for banking, and Wes is right. It's hard in that it's a lot of work, but it's not hard because you don't require a lot of creative thinking. You just have to do it.
That makes sense. Well, still going back to then when you graduated, were there any challenges that you faced or anything that you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
I think I'll probably go back to something like a senior associate told me when I started, right? Which was it's okay not to know everything once you start. And that's a big pressure that we all put on ourselves. Once we get into a new role, you're typically used to performing at a very high level. And so you get into a new position, you're starting out something new, but you feel like you need to know everything, or you need to be able to come up with all the answers when asked. And he kind of had to remind me, it's okay. You're only 2 months into the job. If you knew everything, then we would have made you a VP by now, right? So it's okay not to know, but the important thing is asking the right questions and showing initiative. So one thing he taught me that stuck with me, which I used very, very, very often, was if I'm asked to do something, right? Hey, want you to run this analysis. I'm like, never trained me on this. I have no idea, right? I actually give it a lot of thought and say, and take a crack at it very quickly and say, hey, this is what I understood from what you asked. This is where I'm going with this. Is this how you were thinking about this? Which is a very great way of saying, I don't know. And sometimes you're right in how you were thinking about things. And if you are wrong, they take that opportunity to correct you because they see you putting in effort, which is way better than saying, I don't know, or being super stressed out about it. So, the one challenge I'll say I faced was putting so much pressure on myself to know everything. And the help that I got was understanding that it's okay not to know everything once you start.
I don't have too many regrets, but maybe I'll just answer a related but different question, which is what advice would I give myself? The advice I would give is that you will find a job. And Parker can make you feel that you might not sometimes, but you will. You don't have to rush that process. For banking, it's different, which is kind of like one of the appeals of banking consulting is that you get your offer really early, and then everyone's like, oh, everyone's jealous of you. As someone who did normal recruiting, didn't go back to banking, and did normal non-structured recruiting my second year, I felt that pressure for sure. And now looking back, I think it was kind of silly. I recruited so early that I ended up having to start working during school. So that really backfired on me. But my point is everyone gets a job. Maybe it's not the day after you graduate or a month after. I have plenty of friends who didn't start working until 3 to 6 months after graduating, and they're fine. Like you have 30 more years, 30, 40 more years left to work. So don't rush the process. I mean, you invested 2 years of time and money into business school. So don't let the pressure of Parker scare you. Their incentives are to get you a job, any job, and not so much get you the job that's really right for you.
Great points. Just a few more questions before we get to the audience Q&A. What do you think is and this is, I think, a question that I'd love to hear both of you answer. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing women in finance? And do you have any thoughts on how we can meet this challenge, both as men and women here on the call?
Well, I'll speak a little bit and give the floor to Joyce to sort of go deeper. So, obviously my experience is from sort of working with women in my field. And I think the 3 biggest challenges, like from what I've seen, one would be the pressure that women put on themselves to be like super perfect. Every woman that I worked with, especially in banking, wanted to be like pristine and like feel like they deserve to be, there. The reality is they deserve to be there even more than like others, but they didn't feel that way. So I think it's a psychological challenge. There's also, the challenge that they have with sort of balancing society's expectations and like career progression. So oftentimes, my female friends that I talk to in the workplace are like, but I want kids, and I don't know if I can do both. And so it's a big challenge. And some companies are doing better than others in terms of making women feel empowered to make those decisions about family and not be afraid that it's going to affect their career progression. But there's still a long ways to go there. And then the final is more so like certain, especially within finance, I think it's getting a little better, but still there's a lot of like misogyny and certain like inappropriate behaviors from people at all levels towards women. And, the challenge of, do I speak up and maybe, be criticized for that, or do I keep quiet and just keep it moving? I think those are the pressures that I've seen.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that list. And just to elaborate on a bit of those, this concept of work-life balance, just because the reality is women are still take on more of the household responsibilities than men. And I think something to look for that may indicate a company's kind of commitment to work-life balance is whether or not they have paternity leave that's equal to the length of maternity leave. Because without paternity leave, without men taking the more equal share of child raising responsibilities, the gender gap is going to persist. So I think that's a good like green flag to kind of look out for. But yeah, I think there again, there's kind of the external factors, and then there's the internal ones, and the internal ones, they're ones that you can control a bit more. But I think it comes down to, like, don't be hesitant to champion yourself. If you have to go home to take care of your kid or pick up your kid from daycare, I used to be afraid to go home to like do for any kind of excuse, right? Like I had pre-existing plans, or I have to like literally fly out in an hour. I'd be scared to even say that. And I'm just realizing now, having a few more years under my belt, how silly that is. You got to champion yourself. If you have to be somewhere, you shouldn't feel shame about that. If you have to, whether or not that's related to a child or not, I think that pressure kind of gets you that face time, and you really have to kind of know yourself and value yourself enough to not let that kind of hold you back in your career. Because the junior level is a little bit easier, but as you get more senior, the pressures feel greater. But as long as I think you know yourself, you're authentic about your needs and wants as it pertains to both your life and your work, I think that goes a long way. And one last thing I would recommend specifically for women, there's a book called How Women Rise. Highly, highly recommended. Talks a lot about sponsorship and mentorship and how those are different, and kind of the self-inflicted challenges that women have.
Thank you for that. I know there's a lot more work to be done, but glad to hear your candid responses and how we can do better. One more question from the chat before we get to the audience Q&A. Do you feel like people in finance get to show up as their authentic selves? Is a wide variety of communication, dress, and work styles welcome, or do people mostly have to fit traditional molds of how a finance professional behaves? Love this question.
Yeah, I think it's more traditional than most industries. I remember having this conversation with my girlfriend. I was like, hey, I'm taking this new role. Do I need to shave off my beard, right? Because traditionally, and this actually has happened, right, where like when I started early on in finance, I overheard my boss at the time telling another senior executive why he chose not to take like a certain associate to a client meeting. And he was like, yeah, he doesn't shave, and I'm not, like certain like client facing roles within banking, like they want you to, clean shaven, all that kind of stuff. Like, they care about your hairstyle. Like it's a little silly, but it's what it is. But I think it's progressed a little more where you can, look how you look and be yourself, but you kind of have to be strategic about it. One, so in my current role, I spoke to my boss about it. Like, I was like, hey, look, I grew this beard. I like it. Like, what do you think? And he was kind of like, yeah, it's cool. But the other aspect as well is to look within your industry and the clients that you're serving and see how they'll respond to like your image and bringing your authentic self. And that's at the point also a decision for you to make, right? Do I want to be in this industry that doesn't appreciate like me bringing my whole self? And then if that's not, if they don't want that, then maybe that's not where you should be, right? Because you don't want to deal with that pressure on top of like actually doing a good job. So that's something to actively think about. And I think you can uncover certain things by just having conversations like I did with my boss.
Yeah, I love the candor. It's very true. The answer to the question is like, no, you can't really wear whatever you want. Sometimes when I go to my old company, I feel like I was wearing a costume. Like, what is this suit? But that's the reality of perhaps it's client services or maybe it's finance specifically, but it's not that people don't want you to be yourself. It's more that they're concerned what the client's going to think. And that's just the reality that's going to probably continue for a while. It's getting better. Like the LA banks, for example, people don't wear suits. but I mean, the guys are wearing collared shirts, so it's like not too much of a huge shift. But that is the reality of finance. And to Wes's point, if that's something that, you think about for yourself, whether or not you're comfortable with that. And if you're not, like, that's totally fine. It is very exhausting to not be yourself for most of your waking hours when you're at work. So something to really ask yourself. And I don't want this to sound hopeless where you have to like dress up like someone that you're not or be someone that you're not all the time. There are ways to kind of push the envelope a bit. Like I love Wes's point about just asking like, hey, is this okay? If there's someone that you feel comfortable with asking that, like ask those questions, or, push the envelope a little bit and see what happens. If it's casual Friday, see what happens if you wear that other thing or you say this certain thing. Because I think there's more willingness for folks to kind of hear and see other people, diverse people. So there is that kind of push and pull and play. I would encourage you all to play around with that if you'd like. But yeah, I don't think, Wes, I want to set the expectation that like, yeah, just be yourself or like look exactly the way you want, because that's just not the reality in banking, at least.
That's fair. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty. At this time, we can definitely open the floor up to questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or to raise your hand, and we'll do our best to address them all. And I definitely have some extra questions if no one else jumps in. Suyesh, feel free to unmute yourself if you can.
Thanks, Darren. Joyce and Wes, you guys have both kind of navigated your career in finance in different roles, different companies. I guess what has been, like, how have you navigated that in terms of finding a role that you feel like is the best next step for you? And I guess for me, as someone who's pivoting into finance, that seems like an overwhelming decision. Like, you finally gotten into the industry, now I'm gonna like switch to a different role. So could you elaborate a little bit more on your thought process on navigating your career and kind of taking that next step?
I think it's like an ongoing project of mine, figure out how to navigate my own career. So if you never figure it out, that's fine, because I haven't figured it out fully yet either. But one thing that was very appealing about banking to me and my classmates was that the progression is very clear, right? You start an associate, VP, director, MD, or however the titles are. So that was very appealing, because it means you have to work very hard, but you don't have to like wonder what's next 2, 5, 10 years going to look like. So I think that feels like a safe place for many people. And of course, there are people who truly do love the work. That's probably a minority. But yeah, I think that's something that feels safe. And I would, encourage you all to challenge that. For me, I work at a startup. It might fail tomorrow. And that's very terrifying for someone like me who's very risk averse. But the way I got over it is just this belief in we kind of alluded for the people and the culture. I really believe in the product. I believe in the people. I look forward to going to work. And that's enough. Like, I have enough confidence, and we all should, enough confidence in ourselves that the next job you take isn't going to be your final job, most likely. So kind of recognizing that you're going to have probably 3 to 5 to 10 more jobs before you retire, and that's okay. And not every decision is as massive as it feels like in the moment. For me, I hesitated so long to join this company because I was like, what's the job after this job? And kind of thinking about that all the time really crippled me for a while. But I think I focused more on the possibilities versus like, oh, what am I going to do afterwards? Because even if I thought Turner was my dream job after Anderson, I thought I was going to stay forever. And even having that mentality, I still left. So maybe I guess the point is, like, you never really know what you're going to want in 5 years anyway. So don't need to freak out so much about it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what Joyce said, I 100% agree with. For me, I was looking for, and that's like sort of one of the grids, like, it's where can I learn? Where can I grow? Where will I be recognized? So if that position looks like a place where I think I can learn something that I'm interested in, that I can grow. So, she talked about like very clear progression and where I can be recognized. And recognition could be, different things for different people. For some, recognition is compensation. If you want to show me that you recognize me, pay me. For others, it's words of affirmation and given titles. So those were like three things that were important to me, and that's kind of how I sort of navigate next steps. And then it's also nice if you have like some long-term goal or like a long-term idea of, even if not specific, what you want your life to look like, and do like, to use a banking term, do some comps, right? And then be like, okay, so this is what I can aspire to. Do I like their lifestyle? Do I like how they're living? And if the answer is yes, for sure, then that's a good place to go.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I can ask a lighter one. Could you both tell us a piece of music that you identify with and why? Or said a different way, if you were a baseball player or a football player, what would be your walk-up song?
It's a great question. I probably, the philosopher Nipsey Hussle's Motivation. Great song, gets you pumped for whatever is ahead. So
I was like looking through my Spotify. Not a specific song, because I would say any song by Megan Thee Stallion, because thematically they're pretty much all the same. But what I love is just about her and other female rappers, just the confidence that they exude. And it's kind of a parallel to this conversation because they're women in a male dominated industry, and they're so proud of it, and they're so outward about it. And I aspire to be like them in that regard.
I love that. I think both of those artists are two people who sort of refuse to be boxed in. So definitely speaks to their originality and to the originality of you both. A follow-up question in a similar vein, there's a tweet that stuck with me that only originals leave a mark in this world. And I think in the workplace, a lot of people can tend to deviate to the norm, but are there any sort of like standout features that you have that you're really intentional about bringing into the workplace and that you think really make you unique?
I'm still figuring out how to present that at the workplace, but one thing I used to kind of hide, and I'm now not doing that so much anymore, is just my cultural background. So I'm Vietnamese, and I grew up with a lot of shame. It's like very typical Asian American kind of story, but grew up with a lot of shame. So one example was I had before COVID and before catered lunches, I would bring food to the office, and Vietnamese food to other people smells bad. So I've heard, and I used to be really, really ashamed of that. And now maybe I'm just older and I don't care as much. Now I'm getting over that and kind of, and it's gone pretty well. Like people are like, oh, what is that? Like what are the ingredients there? And I think that was a source of tension for me in my own head for a long time, but it also is a conversation starter about not just Vietnamese cuisine, but Vietnamese culture. And then I talk about all my shame before and having this same conversation about my family and their story about as refugees. So I think that's probably the most unique thing that I bring to the workplace that I kind of show on a consistent basis.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think for me, it'll be like, listening intently and like following up with people. A lot of people are great at what they do, but are not so great at the art of following up. And it makes a world of a difference. Like just following up with people. You have a conversation about something, following up and say, hey, about that conversation we had. And it's actually very valued.
Yeah, I think that reminded me of another one that I am putting into practice is not being afraid to make people uncomfortable sometimes, and not like like poking at their personal things. But one thing, for example, that I was so afraid of when I come back to this HR issue, I knew that we would never have HR, and in my head, I never wanted to ask because I knew the answer would be no. So for the first couple of years to turn, I just didn't ask. And eventually I was like, why? I'm just going to ask. Even if the answer is no, like let them say no, as opposed to me saying no to myself. So kind of putting the leadership in those slightly uncomfortable positions, as opposed to you just like kind of hiding away. And I think that helps push the envelope. And maybe one day there will be HR, but you never know until you ask. And I think for me, something that I bring and continue to bring is just not assuming the answer is no. It's okay to ask and let other people say no. And because otherwise, they might not have ever known that this was a concern. So little things like that, I think keep pushing the envelope in that way, because, folks do want to hear from you.
I think we might have time for one or two more questions before breakout rooms. Anything else from the chat or from the audience? Okay, I can close us out with one final question then. If there's one thing that you want to emphasize today and wouldn't want any of us to forget, what would that one thing be?
Well, one that I mentioned before, you will get a job after business school. So don't forget. I know the pressure is real and you should put effort into recruiting, but you will probably be fine. The other thing is most of us are late 20s, early 30s. You got like 30 years left to work. So there's a lot of time. If money is important to you today, I think that's totally valid for whatever personal reasons you might have for that. But if you also want to pursue something that you are more personally interested in for slightly less money, for a slight pay cut today, like that's also fine, because you have 30 years left to work and 30 years to make up that maybe 20K salary difference that you're not getting today. So just be kind of real with yourself about what your personal needs are in terms of money, because life, I know people say life is long or short, but sometimes I feel like careers are very long.
I would say prioritize yourself and don't be afraid to fail. It's okay, to fail at things that you're new at. And so, don't let the fear of failure scare you into not doing something that you really want to do.
Awesome. Thank you both again for your time. If we could give our panelists a round of applause, a virtual round of applause, maybe.